This is the Biz News Podcast, one-on-one conversations with experts in business and personal development.
Terrence Ziemniak calls himself a fractional executive, helping a number of small and larger businesses to fend off cyber criminals and the troubles they bring. His background includes stints helping teams of all sizes involved with information security. He says no matter the size of a business, its leaders need to be working to protect it from attacks by cyber criminals. In this edition of Bizgnus Interviews, he offers some ideas and suggestions.
Great.
Terry, you have, among all of the guests we've had for years, one of the longest resumes, which must indicate a very vigorous career. Would you give our listeners and viewers the 30-second elevator pitch of what your background is?
30 seconds. All right, let me see what I can do, Douglas. So real quick, the first phase of my career was technical. So I was the bits and bytes guy doing cool cybersecurity stuff like penetration testing, architecting big security solutions. Phase two is compliance and executive. So I transitioned over into HIPAA compliance and then kind of ramped up through the organizational chart, became chief information security officer at several large healthcare organizations across the US. And my third phase, hopefully not my final phase, but my current phase is now I'm a fractional executive. So I kind of tie that experience together and I help small and mid-sized businesses deal with cybersecurity risk at a business level. So there's 30 seconds.
Very good. The elevator just made it.
Excellent.
So Terry, what should business leaders be on the lookout for when it comes to cybersecurity for their firms?
Well, I tell you the first thing, Douglas, is you're not looking for any one thing. It's a realization that cybersecurity is a business risk. So in the same sense, you don't control financial risk, you don't control competitive risk, HR risk, whatever else you're dealing with. You have to be aware that there is a nebulous concern, a threat, a risk out there. You've got to be aware of it and you've got to manage it correctly. And the goal of managing is not to drive it down to zero, but put in an appropriate level of protections commensurate with the risk to your business. Because though I'd love you to, you can't spend all your money on cybersecurity, right? So you got to figure out what the right level is, understand how it impacts your business, and make appropriate decisions accordingly.
That must be sometimes a hard sell for the old school of business leaders. Say, what is this thing on the line here? Why do I have to spend so much money for it?
Indeed, and there's been an interesting change in the past couple of years, Douglas, with the clients that I work with, in that it originally was one of two things. The old school was, I've been hacked. I've got some known security incident. Please help me. And that's fine. Number two would be, I have a friend who had a cyber incident, or I read an article which got me thinking about this issue. Let's talk about that. There's been a third driver recently that popped up, is that these small and mid-sized businesses cannot sell unless they convince their buyer they're secure. So if you're selling to a hospital, to a bank, to the government, to the military, even to consumers, there's all these expectations and actual contractual and regulatory requirements. And if you can't satisfy these requirements, literally, I know people losing contracts with insurance companies and banks because they can't pass the security muster. So, it is a pivot that it's actually blocking business. So one of the phrases I came up with recently is, you got to at least be secure enough to sell. And that's a true, distinct business problem that even the old timers can see and understand.
It is indeed a new territory that we are now all looking at. As you look across the business landscape, do you see thousands of castles with moats and, in other words, businesses well protected? Or do you see a field of sheep full of holes like Swiss cheese? Now, there's an interesting idea.
Yeah, the sheep and the Swiss cheese. It's a mix because, it's a realization with today's economy and how the businesses work. No business is an island anymore. So if you're bulletproof and you're as solid as can be, that's great. But undoubtedly you're using or buying services or technology from someone else, or you're letting them use your data, or everyone interacts with someone else. So a large number of breaches you hear about is partner related, or some kind of intra-company risk, and that's where you're seeing the problems. Again, that's why these small businesses I just mentioned are having trouble selling to the big businesses, because the big guys are saying, you are a risk to me. If I'm buying your technology, if I'm buying your service, if I'm letting you take my customer data for marketing purposes, how do I know you're not going to impact me? So generally speaking, Douglas, that's called third-party risk. So again, when I was an executive at a big healthcare organization, I'm looking at protecting myself, but I'm also worried about all my partners. Transcription and billing and outsourced services and data analytics, all those people are a risk to me and my reputation and my data.
It is just an astoundingly complex and growing nightmare. Why on earth hasn't the government or business or some kid in a basement in Minneapolis put an end to it?
Well, like you mentioned, it's a very complicated problem and solution. You can be 100% secure, or you can be pretty close to 100% secure if you had no people and you weren't connected to anything. In the old days, the government had something, I think it was called the Orange Book, that the government used back in the military in the 80s and 90s. And they had levels of protection, and the highest level of protection was a computer in a concrete bunker that wasn't plugged in anything. It was really secure. It just doesn't work. The problem with the nature of business is services go in and out, people go in and out, data go in and out. So if you interact, you've got to realize you have these interactions. You have to manage that risk. And I take it back to that key word. It's a risk. You'll save money using an outsourced development group. It'll save you money, maybe quicker, maybe faster, whatever it may be, but it's risk because you're letting those outside people touch your environment.
Every day, businesses are hiring new people. There's a lot of turnover. Should we add some sort of quizzing about cybersecurity to the interviews we do before we hire people?
Yeah, so the people part of security is an interesting aspect. So when you talk about cybersecurity protections, Douglas, they typically break them into three parts: people, process, and technology. So technology is firewall, a piece of software. I'm going to buy a widget and it's going to make me more secure. That's fine. The process part is a little nebulous, but actually it's a lot of value there. That would be the idea that if Douglas is faked, if a fake email comes in and you believe it's someone asking you to change bank routing information, a real common attack these days. The process should be, I look at it and then I send it to my boss and he sends it to some sort of process to make sure one person's mistake's not going to impact the organization. Then you got the people part. There's your third pillar, the people. Almost all cyber issues are tied to people problems. It could be Terry has a bad password, Terry lost his firewall, lost his phone, or it could be engineer Terry made a bad decision, or it could be accountant Terry fell for a bad email, all sorts of things. So yeah, people training is a big part. That's cybersecurity culture. Another component. As a security executive, I tell you, one of the big things companies can go for and should strive for is cybersecurity culture. So if people are trained to say, hey, I clicked on something bad and something happened, I better tell Terry instead of hiding it. If we're at the point that I need to sign a contract with another party, I better tell security folks before I sign the contract. So you need to engage the entire staff as part of your security team, because security can't control everything. Your finance people have to be aware of their issues, and HR and your IT folks and whatever it may be. So absolutely, people is a big part of cybersecurity, but everyone's busy at the end of the day. Your HR end of year review is not tied to how secure were you. It's how many widgets did you produce. So there's it's another complicated issue.
Do you see an easy solution to any of that?
No, it's not. And again, because people think, if you think that a solution is going to fix it, you're never going to get there. No people, process, or technology is going to solve anything. Just like you don't solve risk, your business risk and your competitive risk with any one single problem. What you have to do is you have to stratify what you're doing, decide what's important, decide what's not important, and it's risk management. So a process to say, of the million things we're worried about, these are the 50 that are really important to us. And of the 50, maybe you will buy some technology, we'll do some training, we'll do education. So again, the other part is you're never 100% done. You're never at 100% secure. You could get to 99.9% secure, but tomorrow you hire a new employee. Tomorrow you have a new contract. Tomorrow there's a new Russian hacker group you have to deal with. There's things change constantly, and that's another part of the problem.
Well, you're just a barrel of good news. My gosh.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's awareness. So business leaders have to be aware there's a problem. And I'll tell you, there's another aspect recently it's popped up in the cybersecurity space, and it's the idea of business resiliency. So this idea of business resiliency is that we're going to put a lot of effort to making sure bad things don't happen. Your ransomware, your viruses, whatever it may be. We're going to do our best to prevent it. And if something bad happens, we're going to do our best to control and manage it. But the final step is, if all heck breaks loose and something really, really bad happens, how does the business survive? So that, again, ties it back to the business part. What's really important to us? You must make payroll. You better figure out how your payroll is going to function if your technology's down. Your contractual service level agreements, how do you maintain that when your technology's down? Regulatory, financial requirements, whatever it may be. Again, figure out, of the million things you have to deal with, what are the 10 really important things for your business to function, and think about the resiliency aspect, because if you get hit with ransomware, your company's technology may be down for weeks. It's not unusual these days. How does your business survive? Do your best to make sure it doesn't happen, but if not, let's make sure that the company doesn't go under.
And always be sure to back up before you leave for the night, I guess.
That's part of it, but backups aren't good enough anymore. The bad guys are attacking backups. So it really comes down to, you need to understand and appreciate the risk. If we're talking to business leaders, understand the risk is out there. Understand kind of the big drivers. Understand the expectations of your prospects and clients. What do your prospects and clients expect of you? What do your investors expect of you? What do the leadership expect? And then derive kind of a strategic concept of, this is where we're headed. Again, it would involve people, process, technology, but it's got to start with the strategic imperative. Unfortunately, security costs. Doesn't have to cost a lot, but every little thing you buy costs a little bit of money. When you add the security controls, typically they add a little extra steps for your end users. So everything you do is going to add a little bit of complexity to your environment. If you don't have the organizational fortitude to deal with that, you're going to be a problem. I've got clients, we talked about training users. We're going to start training users. Great, we're going to do it. But exclude me, because I'm the boss and I'll never fall for a bad email. It just doesn't work that way. So it's got to be a strategic imperative. Again, it should not bankrupt you, but what's the right level of security, and are you properly supported?
Terry, where can our listeners and viewers reach you? Do you have a website?
Well, yeah. So I work with a company called Tech CXO. So we're a group of fractional executives. We talked a little bit about that. So what I do is I've got a number of small clients, small and mid-sized companies, and I'm a part-time executive for them. So they get kind of the value of my executive background, technical background, but it's going to be a small slice of what an FTE would cost. And Tech CXO is an organization. We have financial folks in that space and CTOs and other executives in that space. So if you're looking for me, Tech CXO, and you can look up Terry, you'll find me there with some other folks.
Terry, do you have any more really good news for people?
The good news, this problem can be solved and it can be managed. It's not insurmountable, but you have to be aware of it. You have to look at it like any other risk. So I would suggest, think through, again, what does the business need to do? What do you need to do to survive? Come up with strategic plans to deal with it. These are not incredibly expensive processes. It's just a level of due diligence. 99% of the cyber issues that are out there can be relatively easily fixed. You may have heard of multi-factor authentication, so name, password, and a call to your phone, for example. Training users on cybersecurity concepts, making sure your backups work, testing your incident response. These are not horribly complicated or expensive efforts, but you have to have a program to do it. So don't envision going bankrupt being secure, but you have to be kind of broadly engaged in the cybersecurity. Unfortunately, it's kind of a mess, but engaged and make this a strategic driver for your business.
You've been listening to the Bizgnus Podcast. We welcome your input. Send your email to editor@bizgnus.com. That's BIZGNUS.com. Thanks for listening.